We are in 2 Kings chapter 12, and this is God's word. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years Jehoiada the priest instructed him. The high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Joash said to the priests, "Collect all the money that is brought as sacred offerings to the temple of the Lord, the money collected in the census, the money received from personal vows, and the money brought voluntarily to the temple. Let every priest receive the money from one of the treasurers, and let it be used to repair whatever damage is found in the temple." But by the 23rd year of King Joash, the priests still had not repaired the temple. Therefore, King Joash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and asked them, "Why aren't you repairing the damage done to the temple? Take no more money from your treasurers, but hand it over for repairing the temple." The priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people and that they would not repair the temple themselves. Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid. He placed it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the temple of the Lord. The priests who guarded the entrance put into the chest all the money that was brought to the temple of the Lord. Whenever they saw that there was a large amount of money in the chest, the royal secretary and the high priest came, counted the money that had been brought into the temple of the Lord, and put it into bags. When the amount had been determined, they gave the money to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple. With it, they paid those who worked on the temple of the Lord, the carpenters and builders, the masons and stone cutters. They purchased timber and dressed stone for the repair of the temple of the Lord and met all the other expenses of restoring the temple. The money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, or any other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid to the workmen who used it to repair the temple. They did not require an accounting from those to whom they gave the money to pay the workers because they acted with complete honesty. The money from the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. About this time, Hazael, king of Aram, went up and attacked Gath and captured it. Then he turned to attack Jerusalem. But Joash, king of Judah, took all the sacred objects dedicated by his fathers, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, the kings of Judah, and the gifts he himself had dedicated, and all the gold found in the treasuries of the temple of the Lord and of the royal palace, and he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram, who then withdrew from Jerusalem. As for the other events of the reign of Joash, all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? His officials conspired against him and assassinated him at Beth Millo on the road down to Silla. The officials who murdered him were Jozabad, son of Shemith, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer. He died and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Amaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. May God add his blessing to this reading from his holy and inspired word. Joash became king at age 7 because his life had been spared by someone else, and he was thrust into that role at age 7 because Jehoiada the priest couldn't take the wicked queen's wickedness any longer. He orchestrated the thing. He used this boy in a way that was appropriate to basically revolt against a wicked, evil, demonized queen, in order to try and get rid of Baal worship, which he was successful in doing, and in order to try and reestablish the worship of the one true God. That's pretty good. And as long as Jehoiada was alive and instructing Joash, Joash did the right thing. I mean, this is the guy who rescued him. This is the guy who put him in the position of power. So as long as Jehoiada was around giving him instruction, he did pretty well. Now, it mentions that there was something he didn't do so well. Apparently, Jehoiada did not insist that the people worship God the way God said he was to be worshiped. In other words, they'd gotten back to worshiping the right God, but they weren't doing it God's way. God had said that they weren't supposed to be offering sacrifices on all these different altars. The problem there was that all kinds of pagan rites began to get mixed into the worship of God. And frankly, even if that had not happened, it would still be wrong because it wasn't what God asked for. If I were to say to my wife, honey, would you please make me some eggs this morning? I'd like them scrambled. And she said, sure, darling, I love you, I'm happy to serve you. And she brought me 2 eggs sunny side up. Well, I'd eat them, but I'd wonder, what's the deal here? Did she not hear when I said I'd like them scrambled? I mean, how hard is it just to go like this? I mean, arguably, it's easier to do scrambled than it is sunny side up, especially without breaking the yolks. But I didn't ask for sunny side up. I asked for scrambled. And when somebody is supposedly doing what you ask, they ought to do it the way you ask. Amen? If I said to my son, I want you to go to the store and buy me another one just like this. And he went and he came back and he said, hey, Dad, I found this. I thought it was cooler. That's not what I asked for. And when God says, this is the way that you are to worship me, and he's very specific because it's all very symbolic and it all points to Jesus. And the people decided, well, no, we don't want to have to do it that way. We're going to do it this way instead. Not a good thing. Now, compared to how it was under the wicked queen, big improvement. Compared to what God says it's supposed to be, not so good. So in the opening part of this, we are told that young Joash did what God commanded very well, as long as he had Jehoiada tell him what to do, and with the exception of failing to do away with people worshiping at the high places which were scattered throughout the land. So he gets, in my class, a B+. Okay? I mean, it's a huge improvement. Unfortunately, even Jehoiada had his weaknesses. Because one of the things that Joash rightly said should be done is fix up the temple. That's where we're supposed to worship God. God says it's supposed to be like this. It's a place where God's glory is to dwell. So let's get it fixed. Let's do it right. Let's repair the damage that has been done during the years of Baal worship. And so the priests say, all right, we'll do it. And 23 years into his reign, 23 years into his reign, they still haven't gotten the job done. When I was a kid, my dad had many wonderful qualities, and he knew how to do many things. Mechanical repairs were not at all a strong suit for him. But it wasn't just a matter of knowledge, it was a matter of motivation, because Dad was one who often felt, well, we can get by with that. We can, that doesn't have to be fixed right now. We had a refrigerator in our home, and you pulled the handle like this. It was not just a straight up and down handle that pulled away from a magnetic seal. It was a latch in order to really keep the cold in. So you pulled the handle like this, pulled the latch in order to open the refrigerator door. And in the lower part of the refrigerator, in the front, there was a compartment. We kept potatoes in ours. It was basically a storage compartment. It was not refrigerated. The freezer, the ice box it was called, was up inside the upper portion of the refrigerator. The lower part was just a storage compartment. Unfortunately, the hinges on the refrigerator door began to sag a little bit. And as a result, when you would pull the latch to open the door, the bottom of that upper door would pull on the upper part of that lower compartment, and the lower compartment would fall open. And so we had a solution. It was to take hold of the handle with your right hand and raise your left leg. And you hold the lower part with your left leg like this. You couldn't do it with your right leg or the door would hit you in the shin. So with the left leg, you hold the lower compartment closed as you open the refrigerator. Now, every time we went to get something out of the refrigerator, it was a process, okay? I'm raising my left leg to hold the lower thing in. You have no idea how embarrassing it was to go to a friend's house and get something out of the refrigerator going like this. And they're like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Well, I'm sorry, it's just hardwired in. We have had this problem for so long and neglected to do anything about it that it's just, we just accept that as the way life is. The priests were supposed to fix the temple, but it had been in disrepair so long that after 23 years, they still hadn't gotten the job done. Well, for one thing, they were priests. They were not carpenters. They were not stonemasons. That really wasn't their area of expertise. And so they didn't get the job done for 23 years. And Joash, year after year, keeps thinking, well, it's going to happen. Well, it's going to happen. Well, I'm busy with other things. He's now 30 years old. He became king when he was 7. 23 years into his reign, he's 30 years old. And he looks around at what's going on and he says to his mentor, Jehoiada, "Excuse me, no disrespect here, but what's with the temple repairs? I thought we were going to do this." "Oh, yes, well, we are. We're working on it." "No, you're not. It's been 23 years. You haven't gotten it done. Let's go. From now on, you're not to take any more of this money that's coming in. You stop that. You're taking the money and spending it on other things like for yourselves. You're not getting the repairs done. We're going to put other people in charge of the repairs." Now, Jehoiada was a good priest. Jehoiada even had orchestrated a military coup using the priests and temple guard. But Jehoiada was not a good construction supervisor. It was not just outside his skill set, it was apparently outside of his frame of reference. He just didn't think in those terms. And so, other people who were actually good at this were brought in to do it. I don't care who you are, I don't care how smart you are, there are things that other people can do better than you can. And you need to know that. Some years ago, there was a lawyer who decided he was going to build some rental cabins here in Wares Valley. And being a lawyer, he thought he knew everything. And so he supervised the construction of the building of the cabins. And he got a really good deal, he thought, from a plumber who was a complete con artist. And built all the cabins with no venting for the plumbing. Okay? Now that's really nice when you look at the roof line because there's no pipe poking up out of the roof. And who wants to see those things on the roof anyway? Problem is your drains won't drain and your commodes won't flush. You got a problem if you don't have your plumbing system vented. But this lawyer didn't know that. He was used to sinks draining and toilets flushing and roofs looking nice. And it never really occurred to him what those pipes were up there for anyhow. So when they finished the job and he paid the plumber and the plumber went back to wherever he came from, disappeared into the landscape, this guy started renting the cabins only to discover that none of the plumbing worked. But that's not all he discovered. The first person he rented a cabin to was a woman who's sitting on a sofa reading from a book, enjoying The fact that she can look up and see this magnificent view of the valley and the ridges out before her. Lovely. A wind came up, and because these cabins were placed right along the top of the ridge, the wind was very strong, with nothing to slow it down. And it slammed into the glass in those cabins, and this huge pane of glass, which was not safety glass, broke. And one of the shards of glass, which was shaped very much like a spear, came sailing through the air and impaled itself inches above this woman's head in the sheetrock right behind her. As you might imagine, she was absolutely terrified and did not wish to spend the night in the cabin. But gathering her belongings, she got into the car, went to the rental office, demanded her money back, and was shaking like a leaf. The fellow had to replace all the windows in the cabins because he had not thought about the fact, being a lawyer and not an engineer, not an architect, and not a licensed contractor, and not a humble man who would ask for the input of others. He thought he could just buy some glass that would look nice, hire a plumber who would be cheaper than everyone else, and have some properties. They ended up in bankruptcy. Now, why do I give that illustration? Because this guy was a lawyer. And he thought because he was a lawyer, he was smarter than everybody else. Well, he might be smarter than a lot of plumbers. And he might be smarter than a lot of carpenters. He might even be smarter than some engineers. But he knew nothing about plumbing, nothing about carpentry, nothing about engineering, and very little about life. Jehoiada, the priest, didn't know how to get the temple repaired. And it didn't happen for 23 years, even though he had been tasked with getting it done. We need to have people who know what they're doing their jobs. And let me tell you something. It is a whole lot better to be a good plumber than an arrogant, stupid lawyer. To be a good carpenter, to be a good stonemason, to be a good whatever, truck driver, farmer, janitor, whatever. It's much better to be good at what you do than to be doing something you're not good at. You understand? I wish more people did understand. Because we've got a whole ton of people who are not good at what they do. One of the things that I hope I don't forget was a young man who pretty much grew up here at the ranch and went off to college. After he'd been gone a while, he contacted us and he said, "Pastor Wood, I had no idea how smart everybody at the ranch was." He said, "Everybody there is so smart and they're so good at what they do. I just thought that was what life was going to be like." And he said, "Now that I've been gone from the ranch for a while, I've discovered most people are not very smart and most people are not good at what they do." I said, "I'm glad you've discovered that, son." It's true. It's true. The book of Proverbs says, "Do you see a man who is skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not serve before obscure men." It is a rare thing to find anybody who's good at what they do, because most people are out trying to do stuff they're not good at. Because I know a guy who should never have become a preacher. He would have been a great worship leader. He liked to sing. He had a great voice. He loved to worship God. He loved to lead other people in worship, but that's not the top job in most churches. And he felt like he needed to be having the top job because his brother had the top job, and so he should too. And so he went after it. and he became a mediocre preacher instead of a really good worship leader. Let me just tell you, it would have been so much better if he'd said, you know, I don't think I'm called to preach. Because I can tell you right now, he wasn't called to preach. It would have been so much better if he'd just been a worship leader, which is a wonderful thing to do. It's a marvelous thing. Do what God's gifted you to do. All of you have abilities. All of you have strengths. Rejoice in that. Thank God for it and do what you're good at and do it with all your might. Do it well. Yeah, but that person's able to. Who cares? Do what you're good at. God's gifted you. Rejoice in His choice. Well, when Joash said, you've got to stop taking the money from the people and spending it on yourselves, you've got to start hiring some people who know what they're doing, it worked. They got the temple all fixed up. Everything's going well. I could say more about the chest and people putting in money voluntarily and so forth and so on, but or the accounting, the fact they didn't even have to keep track because everybody was being honest. I don't want to focus there because there's a whole bunch of stuff about this story that's not in this chapter. If you want to read about it, you got to go to a different book, and it's referred to here. It says, you know, the rest of the stuff is all in the annals of the kings of Judah. Well, that's 2 Chronicles chapter 24. In 2 Chronicles chapter 24, we find a lot more details about the sad end of Joash's life. Because you see, after they'd fixed up the temple and things were going really well and everything was good, Joash decided that he was going to do something that he was not supposed to do. 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 17, after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. Catch that. This is from 2 Chronicles 24, beginning in verse 17. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Oh, great king. Oh, you're a great king. Oh, we think you're wonderful. We're so glad you're our king. And he listened to them. When people come up to me and they tell me what a wonderful preacher I am and how much they enjoy my sermons, my immediate thought is not, what do you want? My immediate thought is, what an insightful and spiritually attuned person. Why? Because I'm human and I love to be complimented, even though I'm inwardly, I know I ought to be quick to give all the praise and glory and honor to God because He's the only one who's worthy. But I want to be liked. How about you? Don't you like it when people like you? Don't you think better of them? I mean, you know, if somebody tells you you're wonderful, don't you think, wow, somebody noticed? Right? So there we are. The officials came, they paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and they worshiped Asherah poles and idols. What? Yep. They went back to demon worship, fertility cults. Because of their guilt, God's anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem, although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to Him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. Did you hear this? Jehoiada's dead. The king has turned to wickedness, and so Jehoiada's son is empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, and he stood before the people and said, this is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper because you have forsaken the Lord. He has forsaken you. But they plotted against him, and by order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. By order of the king, they stoned him to death. Joash. This is the son of the guy who was like a father to you. This guy had to be like a brother to you. How could you do this? The Spirit of the Lord is on this guy. The Lord who rescued you. How could you do this? Well, because the officials came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. People told him he was great, and he was stupid enough to believe them. People told him that it would be better if they didn't just worship God, but they worshiped other things as well. And you can't have it both ways. And soon they had abandoned the worship of the Lord, and they were focused on those sinful, demonic idols. Let me tell you something. Some of you guys and girls think that when you leave here, you're finally going to be able to do what you've been wanting to do. No house parents, no mentors, just me. Let me tell you something. You won't have house parents at that point. You won't have mentors at that point. But you will have a choice to make. Are you going to be sold out to Jesus? Are you going to be sold out to Jesus? Or are you going to try and have it both ways? Because if you want to try and have it both ways, you're going to walk away from the Lord. Can't have it both ways. You're either all for Jesus or you're not for Jesus. You can't have it both ways. God will not share His glory with another, and the fact of the matter is, as Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. So I want to plead with you. Face it now. Decide now. Don't just do the right thing because the house parents are watching. Don't just do the right thing because the mentors are around. Do the right thing because it's the right thing and you know it's what's pleasing to God. Serve Him, live for Him, and realize you cannot have it both ways. There will be people who will come to you and try and get you to go in another direction, and I want to plead with you. Remember what you learned. Remember what God is saying to you. And live for Him. Because if you try and have it both ways, your life is going to be a wreck. Well, but can't I repent and come back to the Lord? Yes, actually you can. God may give you the opportunity to come back to Him. But why would you want to come back limping and full of scars if you have the option of not leaving? Why would you want to turn away from the Lord? You know, Pastor Wood, if I set my hair on fire, can't I go to the doctor and get salve and skin grafts? Well, yes, you can. But why do you want to set your hair on fire? You know? Pastor Wood, if I were to chop off the ends of two of my fingers like you did with a hatchet, you recovered from that, didn't you? Yes, I did, but I haven't done it since. It's not the sort of experience you want to have. Don't make the stupid mistakes that others have made, saying, well, it can be fixed. You just don't want to go there. Understand? You don't want to go there. So, 2 Kings gives us the condensed and sanitized version. But Joash did not end well. Having sinned grievously against the Lord and ordered the murder of God's prophet, and engaged and led others to engage in sinful behavior, he ends up taking that which had been dedicated to the Lord and paying it as a bribe to a foreign enemy rather than calling on God to defend him. You see, you can't really call on God to defend you when you're not living for the Lord. And that's why he had to just take the things of God and give them away. It's because he was not walking in obedience to God. He was not depending on God. He was not living the way he should. If you want to be able to depend on God, you need to obey Him. But let me tell you, brothers and sisters, when you obey Him, you can depend on God. He will be there for you. He will meet your needs. He won't always do what you want, but He'll always do what's best. So Joash ended up being assassinated by two of his trusted advisors. Two of the people he thought he could count on. Two of the people in whom he put his trust. They killed him. Killed him while he was lying in bed. He wasn't buried in the tomb of the kings, but he was buried with his relatives. And that's the end of his story. My question is, what's going to be the end of yours? How are you going to end up? Joash started well. Joash ended terribly. I want you to end well. You can if you live for Jesus.